All right, Brandon, welcome back to another edition of the Friday Learning Series. This is now video 5. As I've said all along, I really encourage you to go back and watch these in order. The purpose of these videos is really to build one upon the other. It's a scaffolded approach to try to give some strategies and suggestions that we can start to implement in our classrooms, so we can be consistent, we can be aligned, we can be rigorous, we can have endurance, and all of those things that we talk about all the time, kind of in theory, just trying to give some strategies so that we can actually put it into practice. So as you notice, first of all, different shirt. Yep, it's a different day that I'm recording this. And we're going to start to kick things up a notch and really start to talk about how to really deliver this stuff into practice. Quick recap, because again, we're in week 5 of this. If you've watched all of the other 4, right now you've earned an hour of PD already. Woohoo! But we are on 5 right now. So we've covered mean, median, and mode, and whether or not we should average grades together, or whether or not that is mean. We've talked about preponderance of evidence and looking at patterns of evidence. Evidence is another word for assessment. We've talked about the idea that formative and summative assessment should not be labels we slap on an assessment ahead of time, that we should treat all evidence as though it's equal, and that we as teachers need to use that evidence differently. We can use it formatively, we can use it summatively, but all assessment should be equal. We've talked about the tic-tac-toe board and trying to collect evidence 3 in a row. We've talked about the idea of choosing those essential learnings and those power standards based off of depth, endurance, and leverage. Today, we're going to talk about the process of learning, and we're going to take this to the next level. So again, all of that other stuff was all great. It kind of related to grading. Today, it's going to kind of relate to grading as well. But as I mentioned, this isn't just about grading. Grading is really just that pivot point. It's that first domino that starts to fall, and then opens up a whole lot of other doors. Okay? So let's jump in. Last week, when we talked about those power standards, we talked about the idea that our power standards are really focused on those standards that carry the most depth, are higher order. It's weird to say depth and high order because they both mean kind of the same thing. But we're talking about those things that, according to Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge, require more cognitive complexity. It's the things like analyzing and synthesizing and creating, as opposed to knowledge and understanding. We're not saying knowledge and understanding or knowledge and comprehension, recall and putting things in your own words are not important skills. They are, but they are not the most essential. And the reason they're not the most essential is because they are the things that don't endure. They're the things that don't last. They're the things that we can see through cognitive studies. They don't get lodged into our long-term memory like high-order skills do. And the goal in education is to really lodge things into our long-term memory so that we're not just teaching to a test and then kids forget it. Our job is to prepare kids and give them skills that they can use for the rest of their lives. Hence, analysis, application, synthesis, creation, those sorts of things. Okay? So now the question is, how do we assess that? We talked about the idea that assessment really does drive our instruction. I'm a firm believer that assessment should be coming before instruction so that we can know where to assess, or so we can know where to instruct. It also needs to come during instruction, it needs to come after instruction. It should be embedded all throughout. Gone are the days of just teaching Monday through Thursday, giving a test on Friday, and starting the cycle again, because that assumes all kids start the same place and all kids need the same thing, which we know they don't. All kids come to us at different places. So what do we do? So we talked about that grid and having the tic-tac-toe board looking for evidence 3 times in a row. The next step is developing individualized grids or rubrics for each standard. Again, I'm going to use an example based off of a 4-point scale simply because it's easier for most people to translate this to a 4-point scale, because in reality, we use 4-point scales all over the place in education today. GPAs, for example. A GPA is simply a 4-point scale. It's a 4-point scale that demonstrates evidence of learning or grades on a 4-point scale. A 4 represents an A average. A 3 represents a B average, so on and so forth. We use 4-point scales for the teacher evaluation rubric. We've got the minimally effective and partially proficient and all of those sorts of things. We've got that. The M-step is rated on a 4-point scale. So we already use 4-point scales all over the place. So it's kind of a natural fit for us to use a 4-point scale when we're assessing learning. And here's how it's done. It's really kind of simple, but it's something that does require a lot of conversation. Remember, our goal is to try to make things consistent across grade levels and across departments. So if you have another 4th grade teacher, our hope is that 4th grade teachers would have rubrics that are similar, if not identical. If you are teaching 10th grade science, or chemistry or biology. The hope would be that your rubrics would look identical to the rubrics being used in other chemistry or biology classes. So the goal is to make the rubrics identical so that the data that we're collecting is identical and we have more inter-rater reliability, which then helps us in our student data meetings. We can have common conversations, we can chart progress. But again, the instruction, the art of teaching is where the magic happens, and that's where you have all that autonomy. The science of teaching, the analytics and the quantifying and the statistics, well, let's try to keep that as standard as possible. It's the art where you get to have a whole lot of fun. So we're not trying to take away autonomy. Actually, this adds to the autonomy because you're not bound to a script anymore. You're really bound to the students and just making sure that you deliver things that the students need. So let's dive in. So a lot of this has been discussed in the past. We've talked about this, but maybe now it'll make a little bit more sense now that you have the greater context of the last 4 videos. So we talked about those standards, and the standards are written in very complex language. For example, they don't just say students will be able to understand what a character is in a short story. They don't say students will be able to solve simple addition problems. Normally, our standards, well, all the time, our standards are written as complex sentences with verbs that mirror verbs in Webb's depth of knowledge and Bloom's taxonomy. It'll say students will be able to apply, students will be able to analyze, students will be able to synthesize, so on and so forth. Again, that standard represents our minimum expectation. So just like on the teacher evaluation, effective is that minimum expectation. We hope that everybody is at least effective. On the M step, we try to get every single student to at least proficient, which is that level 3. The same expectation is going to hold true when we create our rubrics. So if I had a 4-point rubric, the first thing I would do is I would go into my standard and I would identify the verb within that standard. If it says apply or analyze or synthesize, that verb, excuse me, is going to go into box 3 when I create my rubric. Pretty simple because that's our expectation, that's our standard, what we want kids to get. But we also know that some kids are going to be able to advance beyond that standard. Some of our kids are advanced or accelerated. Well, in a 4-point rubric, we have some options. 4-point rubric, all I have to do is look at Bloom's taxonomy and the verb that is higher up on our scale. So if we're looking at an application standard, for box 4, I'm going to write analysis because that's the next level up. If the verb in the standard already says analysis, then I'm going to write synthesis. If it already says synthesis, I'm going to write creation or evaluation. If it's an understanding or knowledge level, again, the next level up is simply the next level up on Bloom's. Likewise, I'm going to do the same thing going backwards on my rubric. If the verb is application, then my level 2 is going to be understanding or comprehension. My level 1 is going to be knowledge level. This is going to help me understand the depth and the complexity of my student understanding. It's a laddered approach. It's a scaffolded approach. It's also a diagnostic approach, which I'll talk about in just a second. So the verb is our target. Again, our goal is to try to get kids at least to that target. Along the vertical axis is where I'm going to be writing down my content, because the standards are not just verbs. It doesn't just say students will be able to analyze or students will be able to synthesize. It tells us what they're going to be able to analyze, what they're going to be able to synthesize, what they're going to be able to create, what they need to understand. And most of the time, it's more than one thing. Maybe it'll say students will be able to analyze multiple characters in a short story and explain how the characters evolve throughout the course of the plot. So maybe I would have character and I would have plot. Those are 2 different things students are going to have to be able to have a firm understanding of. Or maybe it's students will be able to solve multi-step problems dealing with division and multiplication. So again, you can see what the content is, you can split it up, and you got that progression. Now, as a teacher, it's important to understand that kids do not have to, quote unquote, climb the ladder of success. You don't have to take kids and say, okay, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do the level 1 skill before I can move you on to the level 2 skill. Once you master the level 2 skill, you've got to be able to master level 3. That is not what we do. Why don't we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. Again, let's think about it through the lens of the teacher evaluation process. What if I came into your room to evaluate you as a teacher and I said, before I can give you effective or highly effective, you have to be able to demonstrate that you can do the level 1 skills. Well, that doesn't make sense. Or what about, no, you have to do the level 2 skills once you've demonstrated level. We don't make you jump through those hoops. Just like we don't make students jump through the hoops. If the standard says be able to analyze, let's just figure out if a student can analyze. If they can't analyze, then as a diagnostic, we start working backwards and we say, okay, well, can they apply? Well, if they can't apply, do they even understand the content? It's a diagnostic tool. Think about you take your car to the mechanic. Back in the day, when you took your car to the mechanic, you would drop your car off and you'd say, I don't know what's going on, it's just making this rattling sound. And they would try out everything. They would maybe change the tires, maybe they would change the oil, maybe they would, who knows? But you end up with this huge bill because their assessments or their diagnostic of what was wrong meant that they were testing everything. And sometimes it was simply a money grab, and sometimes it was truly because they didn't know the issue. Nowadays, they can just take your car, literally plug it into a computer, and pinpoint the issue. It's a diagnostic assessment. Same thing happens here. In the old days of education, we weren't necessarily pinpointing student deficiencies. We would throw interventions out at random. We'd give every single kid the blue pill or the pink pill, hoping that that was the medicine that they needed, as opposed to pinpointing exactly where their deficiency is. Maybe a kid can analyze characters but doesn't quite understand plot. So now we know exactly how to differentiate for each kid. We don't make the kids climb the ladder again because it's depth of knowledge. It's not more knowledge or harder knowledge. Again, I told you the story about social studies. I can do some complex things and high order skills with social studies. I can analyze and synthesize, but memorizing dates and names in battles, not my thing. So if I had a teacher that made me memorize a bunch of stuff before I was able to explain it in my own words or analyze things, well then I would get stuck at level 1. And oftentimes that's what we do with kids. We make them stay down here in level 1, memorizing and proving that they can do some basic recall before we think that they can actually do complex things with the standard. If we start with the standard and say, what can you do in a pre-assessment, determine if they can do it, and then work our way backwards or forwards, then we can actually make some momentum. And this is how we cover the curriculum in a more expedited and judicious fashion. We start with the expectation, and then we diagnose, as opposed to making kids climb through a pre-planned, arbitrary sequence. The cool thing about our standards here in the state of Michigan is that the designers of the standards, whether you like them or not, if you've ever really dug into them, they began with the end in mind. What the designers did is they started with the end of 12th grade and they said, what are the college and career readiness expectations? And then they worked backwards. And they said, if we want a kid to be able to graduate high school with this skill set, what do they need to be able to do in 11th grade? And then what would that look like in 10th grade? And what would it look like in 9th grade? And it works all the way back. And what is beautiful, I challenge you, go look at this. Again, K-8 ELA teachers, this work has already kind of been done for you in the rubrics. If you go look at it, what they've done, it's really cool. So let's assume this is a 4th grade rubric. The 4th grade rubric, this is the standard. If a kid moves to the level 4, that advanced level, you know what that is? That's actually the level 3 at the 5th grade. And then this is the level 6. This is the proficient level at 6th grade. And then that's the proficient level at the 7th grade. It's really cool. They understand that skills progress and they build upon each other. So the whole idea of advanced and accelerated, yeah, we can have programs for it, but it's something we can also do within our classes. This is how we meet the needs of every single learner. The idea of a kid not quite being ready for 4th grade, not working at a 4th grade level, well, we can identify the 3rd grade level or in the 2nd grade level, because that's truly how the standards are designed. So we can differentiate, we can meet the needs. If you've got kids that are struggling at the level before, you can go have conversations with the teacher at the grade level before and say, what did you do? What skills did you, what activities did you use to reinforce this? And you can have some across grade level conversations as well. It's pretty powerful when you really wrestle with it. We'll talk more about that soon. Have an amazing day.